Dear listeners, welcome to our Information Week with new updates brought to you by Esther Zatanku, all the way from the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Today we have with us the special envoy of the chairperson of the African Union Commission on Women, Peace and Security, Her Excellency, Mrs. Bineta Diop, who will take us through some of the major achievements under her mandate, as well as enlighten us on the activities undertaken by the African Union on women, peace and security in the continent. Excellency, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and let me congratulate you for this series of information. It's key. The world wants to know, and you are doing it well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Excellency, our first question will be on what has been your achievement since your appointment as Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security of the AUC Chairperson, Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma?
I was mandated in 2014, and I don't want to talk about impact, but I want to talk about indicators and to see how we measure progress, because this is where Africa have to put a lot of emphasis. We have to plan, and we have to follow the plan, and how do we implement it, and how do we report the accountability to ourselves. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be accountable to the chairperson, but to the African Union Commission, but to the women of Africa, because when I was appointed, the chairperson said, I'm asking you to be the voice of the voiceless. And it resonates until now, because my passion is about the women on the ground. The African Union is a policy, commission in particular, organ. And we need to look at, sometime we put a distance between us and the people. So my mandate was really to the women themselves. So I work on policy, and I'm sure that we will come back what kind of policy we have designed to fulfill the mandate, but also the ground, the mission on the ground, because this is, you cannot even formulate a policy if you don't have the voice of the stakeholders. And I think that we have been able to bring all stakeholders together in the formulation of the policy that we have put in place. I'm sure that we will go into the details, but I'm just telling broadly. My first thing to do was to formulate the policy and have indicators that help to measure the progress, not only on my work, but for member states' work. Number one. Number two is the mission that I did on the ground to meet with the women that are our stakeholders. And I'm sure we will go into those and the outcome of those missions. And I think thirdly is that how do we influence? How do we influence member states? And having that dialogue that whatever policy, but whatever the women are asking, how do we make sure that we bring it to the AUC, but also to the head of state? I think that if I talk about achievement, is the progress we have made to make sure that member states accept the women, peace and security agenda. In a nutshell, when I started, I think the agenda was not so much visible. But I think that now the agenda is visible, but we formulate policy where we say that we need to measure, but those policy came with indicators to measure the progress that we are making by member state. But also the issues of women, such as violence against women, but other issues come in light, and now we are talking about accountability. How do we make sure that the perpetrators are brought to justice? So I think I have been able really to bring at the forefront the issues of violence against women, but also the issue of women participation in mediation and others, but also the protection of women and the prevention side as well. So I think that we have been able to give that visibility as well.
This brings me to the second question, Excellency, to ask you, since the beginning of your term, you have undertaken, as you rightly said, numerous field visits and missions. Tell us about some of the inspiring stories you have encountered.
I think now to talk about the achievement, again, I link it to the missions. Because when the African Union were not talking about the Chibok girls that time, and we know that kidnapping was going, it is a phenomenon that have been used by the extremism. So what we did was to meet the escaped girl and make sure that he's visible in the African Union, and we came and interact with the Peace and Security Council to take a decision on this, to say it's alarming. We, African Union, have to take the leadership, but also to talk with the government of Nigeria on how do we rescue the Chibok and what kind of measure we can take on women, peace and security. I think that is something that we have achieved in our mandate. I have been in Somalia as well, in the field, and meeting our brave women and men that are fighting Al-Shabaab, and who are succeeding in a difficult terrain. But what I can say, when I met the female military of AMISOM, having interactive dialogue, I was able to bring light at the leadership of the AU, but also the representative of the African Union Commission in the field on the plight of those soldiers that are fighting for us. For example, to have their safe place themselves in the compound. Those are things that they wanted, because we have needs as female. And the plead that the women of Somalia to talk about police. We wanted female police, contingent of police. So those are issues that you discuss with female in the field. Either it is the civilian protection, either it is the soldiers themselves. You can bring their issue and follow up and make sure that it is done. When I met with the Somali women and men recently in Djibouti in a forum, because now we are helping them to come around the forum with the gender advisor of AMISOM, they were so happy that progress have been made, action in terms of their safe place. That is for me a good story. I talk about the Chibok, but I also talk about Central African Republic, because we have seen what is happening there in terms of violence against women, but also boys that have been raped. When we visited Bangui, meeting with Catherine Samba-Panza, I think it was also to support her as an interim president, a female that have appointed a lot of women, but we wanted to encourage her to go into the dialogue, which was the Bangui dialogue. And my mandate helped the women of Bangui and Central African Republic to make sure that they have an agenda that have been mainstream in the dialogue. So their issues have been there. It's up to the new government to implement the request and the demand of the women. Reconstruction of the countries, the dialogue, the reconciliation, but the psychological support. And then the AU is doing a good job, because Médecins d'Afrique is there doing a good job in terms of supporting the population and the community under the umbrella of the African Union. So we give them courage, we support them, but also in my mandate, what we need to do more is to make sure that in the sustainability of our action, we have network of women for peace and security that take over our agenda. So we create that space for Women Network, which is called Planet Femme, it's Planet Women 50-50, that is now in Bangui, but in all the country, that are working together with the government to make sure that they see the implementation of the Bangui Accord. So not just those countries, but also accompanying the chairperson, for example, in preventive measure in Burundi as well, you know, supporting the women of Burundi who knows that they want to also to get together to reconcile and dialogue in their countries. So I think we have done a lot on field mission and have good practices. I spent also 6 months you know, going from one place to another in South Sudan to support President Obasanjo as one of the Commissioner of Inquiry member to make sure that we also investigate on violence against women and children that occur in the conflict that torn apart the country of South Sudan. I think if you read the Obasanjo report, as we call it, you will find that it is one of the most, I would say, not progressive, but actual in terms of the fact and what we have found on the ground to say this have happened on the ground. Now is that the women are asking for justice and accountability. In that report, we made proposal, and it's up to the leaders of Africa to do it. But we have done our job in documenting. We went to remote places. We went to places that nobody goes to make sure that our mandate is accomplished and the world know that Africa once can go and investigate. And we have the capacity to do that, the capacity to be neutral, and the capacity to look into the eyes of the civilian that have been kept in the war.
That is really very interesting, Excellency. And now I'll come to our Vision Agenda 2063. You know, one of the flagship projects under the 10 years implementation plan of Agenda 2063 is silencing the gun by 2020. Now, I want to find out from you, Excellency, what do you have to say about that? How will you, or how would the African Union ensure that this really happens?
I think it's an ambitious program, starting with Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. But this is what we want. That's what the people want. And for once, we are looking into from the eyes of the population, the youth, the consultation that the chairperson did with the young people, with the women, with the leaders, traditional, religious, etc. I think this is very important. Now, having the flag sheet to say that we want to silence the gun by 2020 is also an ambitious agenda. But Africa needs to silence the gun if we wanted to get into development. As we said, our war have impacted in the population. And if we want to achieve Agenda 2063, we need to concentrate on the human development, you know, of our population. Its agenda should be driven by the population and not just by the leaders of the country. We need a strong leadership, but we need the involvement of the population. We have, in many countries, as we said, the growth, the economic growth, but which is not trickled down to the people themselves. We don't have social inclusion, we don't have social growth, and that's where we need to put the accent. So coming back to the question, how do we make sure that this agenda, silencing the gun 2020, is done? I think one of the major issues is the participation of the people, and especially the participation of women in silencing the gun. You know, we always say that when we are doing mediation in country, let's take a country like South Sudan, how long it takes to bring and how much it takes to bring those who hold the gun. Immediately they start killing. We invest a lot of money to call on the leaders that are killing to reconcile. But to do what? To share power. They just come, we bring them, we walk around them, and again, we give them the cake to share. That's the reality. But when you bring the women, they will talk about the interests of the people, the responsibility they have for the civilian population and the community. So that is why we are saying also, and it's facts, any peace agreement that doesn't include the voice of the women will fail in the 10 years to come. That's the reality, because it is based on power sharing rather than on responsibility sharing. And if we need to silence the gun, it means that in a long term, we will have conflict. Conflict is part of the human being environment. But we solve it within dialogue. But dialogue that is inclusive, that is participatory, that the young people but also the population buy into it. So we need to invest on those prevention issues, but also post-conflict. Look at countries that has, like Liberia, Sierra Leone, that we say we finished with the war, but what we have seen was Ebola. Because the structure, the health structure, was not reconstructed after we finish the war. We bring new government, but we don't give enough resources for the country not to relapse. Ebola is not just health issues, it's a security issues. But if we invest on our centers, health centers, for women, for example, because these are the ones who are curing the population. They are part of the communities and the family. So if you build the education center for the children, invest on that, not just on military only, but on the needs of the people. What you will find is that the country might not relapse in terms of violence in that environment. So I think that prevention, but also post-conflict reconstruction. If we want to silence the gun, but make the population, and in particular women, to have their voice into the life of their country and into the politics. We can see women in parliament, women in government, because the agenda of human security is what they can bring at the table versus the military one.
Now, Excellency, you have argued many times that Africa has enough normative frameworks on 1325 and that what it needs is action and implementation. How do you intend to make this happen?
That's why I said to the AU, when I took over this mandate, I said, no, we don't need any other framework, because we have the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality, which is great, by member states that are reporting to each other at the leadership level. We have the Protocol on Women's Human Rights, which is one of the instruments, very progressive, compared even to international norms and standards. And we have the parity principle that make, the African Union unique, because we have 5 women commissioners and 5 men. That is unique in regional and international organs. So for me, having another policy was something that, doesn't make really sense, because we have everything in our disposal. What we need is implementation, action and implementation. We say no more solemn declaration. What we need is solemn action and solemn deliverable. So that's why we come with the framework for monitoring, evaluation and reporting with clear indicators. And this is what my office have also delivered to the African Union. It was presented yesterday to the Peace and Security Council, and also the report, the first report on Africa, on the status of women, peace and security. So for me, it's action. We need to measure what we are implementing in the 3 pillars, the 3 Ps. participation, protection, and prevention. If we measure the progress on each one, and so far Africa only, now we are about 18 member states that have adopted national action plan, and 2 regional economic communities that have a regional action plan. It's not enough, but at least it helps us to measure the progress that those who have voluntarily adopted national action plan, to see how they are implementing it. For example, when we look at the military that country are sending, deploying in our peacekeeping, what we see in those forces, how many female the countries are sending, while we know that we need to have the women voices and faces in the military component that we are sending, the troop that we are sending on the ground. So I think that we need to make sure that we have more female. So we need to measure progress. Yesterday when we presented the numbers, the facts, so I was seeing some countries in the room will say only 0.5, that we have sent, but we need to do more. So you need to bring that in front to see how we are implementing and how we are measuring progress. So that's why I said no more declaration. Let's measure the progress and where we need to share good practice. For example, Rwanda have a good centers, which is one-stop center that really provides support that those have been violated on the ground, or it's a household, or wherever it is. You have a safe center where you can go report to the police, but also it goes until the psychological support or even the issues of justice happen. So you don't just go to one place and they take your case until it is brought to justice. And sometimes you get compensation. So that is what we need to see more. So if Rwanda can share that. I visited Algeria, for example, and I see how they dealt with the extremism, how they fought extremism. The fundamentalists, they were one of the first countries that have experienced it. They have good practices, how the women have been on the ground. I have seen the same thing in Somalia, for example. Now they have community watch project where the community take the monitoring of the people coming and even their children themselves to see that they are not enrolled by those fundamentalists. So you have those good practices that, for example, Mali, when we presented the community watch program, they start by saying, we wanted this in Mali. How can we come and learn from you and go to Mali to see how we adapt it? Not to copy and paste, but to make sure that we learn from your own experience. So Africa, we need to have this solidarity and peer learning, community learning, and exchange of experiences as well.
Excellency, the theme of the year of the African Union is human rights, with a particular focus on the rights of women. How is your office contributing to this theme?
I think, first of all, as we said years back, women's rights are human's right, part and parcel of the rights of the world. So it's not isolated. But also, we realize that when you look at in the women's human right, it's a social, economic, political, it's all the component of the rights of the people. And peace and security is one of the key fundamental rights that the people aspire to security in your place, the right to enjoy those rights. Either it's your children to be educated, either it is for you to have access to the hospital, but also access to resources. Because if you look at the root causes of our conflict, it's just a denial of the rights of the people. So women are being excluded. You see that if you look at the indicators that trigger some of this conflict, it's a denial of the rights of the people, and including the discrimination of women. So if you make that analysis in conflict, in our early warning and early response, and you realize that this country is marginalizing the population, is marginalizing the women, and marginalizing the youth. It's just an elite that is benefiting from the resources of the country. And of course, you will see sometime riot, or sometime frustration, and sometime enrollment of the children as child soldiers, and so on and so forth. And the community who will be now hiding with those that are perpetrated violence, because they are providing them the necessity, the food, the sanitation, etc. So we need to dismantle the apparatus underground that are triggering the conflict. And you realize that if you address the rights of the women and you provide them the necessity, it means that you are covering 50% of your population. If you add the young people, 70%. So that is why my work is to make sure that we look into preventive measure, because preventive measure is better prevent than to cure. It's costly when you are curing, because it takes time before you silence the gun. Prevention is very key, but prevention is to provide human right, basic human right to your population and for the women. So I think that is where, for us, silencing the gun is one of the big projects that we need to implement and we are contributing to. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda is integrated and fully integrated in this year, 2016, as one of the priority program for prevention. If we don't prevent, we spend our time and our resources to manage war rather than making sure that we have stability and security for our people.
Excellency, I'm really very much enlightened, and I'm sure our listeners are very impressed with what you've given us in terms of information. But this time we'll go to some legal institutional declarations. In Africa, our legal and institutional declarations have evolved in their acceptance of the prevention of violence against women. Yet, the daily reality, particularly in conflict setting, has not. So, how do you think we can bridge this gap?
I think this is one of the key issues, violence against women, because rape has been used as an instrument and I think unless we address this, we will never be able to have a secure environment, because if you violate the body of the women, who can reconstruct afterwards? So prevention of violence is very key. But let me tell you something, because when we are sending the whole world, not just Africa, because this phenomenon is a global phenomenon. I think the Central African Republic have demonstrated that it is not just Africa troops that are violating women's rights, in particular when it goes to rape. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that we work on zero tolerance policy. The African Union have a zero tolerance policy, but we need to implement it. That's a reality. Not just adopting policy, but implementing them. And this was my plea again yesterday to Peace and Security Council, to say that let's review it, let's adopt it, let's implement it, and let's measure the progress. Contributing troop, when we had allegation in the case of Somali, The first time the chairperson sent a team to investigate and see what have happened on the ground. And they came back, the team came back. She sent them again to say, go deeper and go and intervene, because I wanted to know, I don't tolerate this kind of behavior in the troops that we are sending. They came with a report. You go back, and she went back to the country and say to the country, this is the fact that we found on the ground. So now it is the contributing country who has to call back the person that have committed those violence, but also the punishment that need to be done. But most of the time what we realize, you go back, sometime, upgraded you as an officer, you become somebody, or they send you in another country that need you. So that we think that accountability and the issue of justice need to be done up to the end. What we are realizing now is that we say that let's retrieve the whole troop, in not just one person. If one commit or two or three is part of the culture of the troop, let's ask the whole troop to go back, because and I think that is where we need really to have the code of conduct before we deploy them. So they sign, each one can sign that when I go, I'm going to protect the civilian. I'm not going to do harm within the population, but I will protect them. But a lot need to be done. For AU, we need to, for example, the whistleblower, because it happened. Somebody, and you might know, or the women might know, but nobody talk about it. It's a silence. So I think that our visit to Somalia, where we encourage the troops, but in the meantime where we alert them on the necessity of protecting rather than abusing. And I think that they are hearing it more and more, but we need to make sure that the African Union walk the talk.
Now, Excellency, in the last 18 months, what have African governments, whether as a collective or individually, done as a step in the right direction in implementing Resolution 1325 and the broader Women, Peace and Security agenda? Basically, what are we getting right?
Yeah, I think I said yesterday that the glass is half full and half empty. It's half full, and we applaud the efforts, because since I started this mandate, I have been pushing member states to improve. I said there are, it was maybe 15 or 14 national action plan, now that we have 18, and probably we will get more because the sensitization we are doing. Some countries have approached us to do action plan, which really will help to measure the progress that we are doing, because we need to measure to know what is the progress. But what I could see is that there is sensitization at the highest level to improve. When I look at in participation, Rwanda is the number one in the world, not just in Africa. You will tell me it's not our work, but it's the work of the women of Rwanda that make sure that they are number one of participation, either in the parliament or any, My country, Senegal, have done a lot also. So we, in the top 10, we have a lot of African countries, Namibia, etc., that are pushing in terms of participation. In terms of protection, there are many laws that countries have adopted in terms of the protection of women's human rights. Law that punish the issues of, for example, violence against women, many. And some have even put machinery or mechanism or health centers for women. That's in any country I visit, I went to go to look into the machinery or the centers that are put for women that can benefit from it. Post-conflict reconstruction also. We are looking at how much land is given to women, because we know that they need to go back to the land issues and in terms of accessing to finance, accessing to economy recovery, etc., etc. So we are seeing that many countries are evolving, either in the prevention, for example, the women now, when we have elections that are very violent, women are creating something that they call the Women Situation Room, where they will sit and where they monitor elections and make sure that there is less violence. So women are getting more, and member states are also supporting on the prevention, on the participation and the protection. So some countries are doing well. Maybe Rwanda is the one that is doing protection, participation and prevention at the same time. But when I look at other countries, some are doing very well in prevention, but nothing maybe in participation. So we make sure that we have the three pillars, and sometimes we even say 4 pillars, for a country to be fully integrated, the gender aspect in peace processes. So we are pleading, we will continue, but I think the measurement that we are doing will help. This time is 15 years anniversary of 1325 last year, and Africa have contributed to it. And my report that the chairperson will launch in July on the status of the women in Africa on women, peace and security will show where we are at. But when it comes to ourselves, we even here in the commission, I'm saying we need to do more. We need to make sure that our policy are in place, but also we do the action on the ground, and we punish and we push for the punishment that are happening, that need to happen on the ground when people perpetrated violence. Our court of justice should be there to protect or to bring to justice those who perpetrate violence against women, that it become part and parcel of the justice system. More judges, for example. We don't have enough judges. We need in each country to promote that. It's not just participation in the military, but participation in the justice system, participation in government, and participation in... So all governance mechanisms should see women voices and faces.
As you said, you've been talking about your office, or you briefing the Peace and Security Council on 18th of May 2016 on the implementation of the 1325. Where do you think decision makers must direct their focus to?
I applaud Peace and Security Council because now we have what we call the Livingston formula, or the open session. Every time, once a year or twice a year, they will listen to the women from the field. We open doors, have the interactive dialogue. And that's, I think we need to have more open session. But we had a closed session as well. And the closed session with the Security Council is more in terms of briefing them, and for them to be aware of what is going on the ground in terms of women, peace and security. And yesterday, I like very much the reaction that we had in the room, because many of them challenge me in terms of going to their country and either helping the country to have plan of action. For me, I think this is wonderful, because if member states are asking us to support them, give them technical support for them to have an agenda for women, peace and security, we will not have only 20 by the end of the year, but maybe we will have more. And that encouragement that I see from member states, but also the fact that when I go on mission, I told you about the country I visited during my mandate, and I will continue. I'm planning to go to DRC, to Mali, to other places. But what I see is also that they accompany me in my mission. Some of the ambassadors of Peace and Security Council go with me on mission. And it's allowed them also to touch the ground. And yesterday, during the discussion we had, one of the recommendations for them is to make sure that on each briefing of the Peace and Security Council. Either it is in country or thematic issues, they wanted to see the gender aspect. They say, we don't take any document if there is not a gender aspect for us to analyze what is on the ground. So I think we are making efforts by the interaction that my office is doing with the Security, Peace and Security Council of the African Union.
After listening to you, Excellency, we can see that you have really achieved a lot, but now I'll ask you, well, where will you say we are now with regards to women in peace and security in the continent?
You know, when I'm very happy when I go to the Sahel, and last year we helped the women of the Sahel, 5 countries, the women politicians, in government ministries, but also defense, and women from parliament and CSO to come together to create the Women Forum of the Sahel. For me, this is my office tomorrow can say we have replicated ourselves. When you create those facilitate the emergence of those networks. IGAD just created a Forum for Women, Peace and Security, which did not exist before. We support them to have that. You know, we support the Great Lakes to have a platform of women that are dealing with women, peace and security. So at the national level, the Somali women just created the Women, Peace and Security Network. So you see the duplication now, it is happening, the amplifying the voice of our office, but also on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So it's not only me now talking about women, peace and security, but we make sure that you go in Somali, there is a network that is there now to alert and to make sure that participation happen. You go to South Sudan, they just created also their network in South Sudan. I was there to facilitate that creation. So I'm seeing flourishing Women, Peace and Security Network, which bring women ministers together, women parliamentarians, but also women from civil society on a platform to prevent. So I see, wow, it is happening. We see it, and I call them the troops, our army without guns. So if we are able to bring all this network together, we will mobilize the numbers, the voices that Madam Zuma asked me to go and reach out. So we are making sure that we mobilize in each country, and they will be the army without the guns, including the media. We say that we cannot raise our voices and our faces be seen if the media is not with us, especially the African media that understand our culture, where we come from, that understanding our experience and can show it like we are doing today. So we are mobilizing all stakeholders to say women, peace and security agenda should be the agenda of each one of us and of all of us.
In order to achieve all these things, Excellency, I am sure you must have faced some challenges, and I would like to know some of the major challenges to women, peace and security in the continent that you face.
I always start by saying that sometimes we are ourselves the enemies of the agendas of women, peace and security. The male, we need to bring more communities around the agenda. We need to bring traditional leaders, because we cannot be isolating ourselves as women alone, talking to those who are converted. We need through various means to sensitize the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, and starting by our own boys, because these issues of relationship between men and women, we should to improve it. Our traditions and customary, whatever you name them, are the barriers that we face to achieve women, peace and security agenda. So that is number one. And wherever I was in Somalia, I met with the clan, the traditional, having a dialogue with them and trying to convince them, and understanding also what is behind them, that the clan is only composed of themselves as leaders and the women are left behind. So, and how they can transform Somali with the women. So we need to go to the religious leaders. All this Boko Haram and whatever, they are embedded into those tradition and into those culture and the religions that they are using. So we need to have this interactive dialogue with those leaders so they understand that you have to bring your children at school, safe school, educate them. Because if Africa needs to transform, we need to educate our population. What is it that Troop wanted to deny education to our children? So those are obstacles you face. We face also obstacle in terms of funding, because we are saying the agenda of women, peace and security is an agenda put by government in the Ministry of Finance. Namibia is developing their plan of action, but it's led by Ministry of Defense. And what we are saying is Minister of Women's should be working with Minister of Defense and Minister of Finance, because National Action Plan that we wanted to see more flourishing most of the time is not in the budget of the government. They think that UN have to fund it. They don't take the ownership or even the leadership of that plan. So we wanted it to be embedded in national plan, development plan, to be achieved. So the obstacle is, how do we make sure that the gender ministries are not funded? We just leave them the last one on the budget. How do we make sure that gender issues become a priority? And I think that is why we very much, the Africa we want Agenda 2063 and the year of women's empowerment last year and this year, women's human rights, we make sure that we highlight these gaps and those challenges. Resources, where do we place women's agenda in the government, but also the interactive dialogue between ministries, defense, finance, and Ministry of Gender. So this is where we are having a lot of challenges, but we are working on it together as African Union, but also together with the UN. This is a big challenge. But I think that we are getting there. As I said, we're really improving the status of women in conflict, because we are using all the means to shout, but we are also doing everything possible to bring those that are still using the body of the women as a battlefield to make sure that they stop it or they be brought to justice.
Now, Excellency, can we say, after hearing you, that you are optimistic or pessimistic about Africa's security situation in the years ahead?
Oh yeah, we will be. I'm sure that because Africa is now conscious that we have to make sure that we respond and bring our solution. Africa problem, Africa solution. Even with our friends and the international community are supporting us. But we need to take the ownership of our problem and the leadership in the solving those problems. And that's where I say that Africa now, in terms of agenda, we have it. It's there, 2063, but also 2020 by the international. We say this is our aspiration, and we need to work on it. We have solution. The issues is there are good solutions that you find. You go on each countries, you will find solution that can help. The problem is, how do we make sure that we amplify those solutions to implement them? How do we learn from countries that are doing well, Namibia or Senegal or South Africa or wherever we are, or Algeria, whatever country is doing well in the solution? How do we take that solution and amplify? We know that the digital is going to be the revolution. I said there are 3 revolutions that we need, and somebody have added even one. The gender revolution needs to happen. Whatever impact we have on the cultural barriers, the traditional barriers, genital mutilation, early marriage. We need to make sure that it is eliminated in Africa. Gender revolution. Agriculture revolution, where women have more than 50% of their share in the all value added in that. The digital revolution, because with digital we know that you reach out everywhere. You know, I see a project that is happening in Kenya, where women that are in the agriculture sector don't want even to move to the market. You have all the information you need from your mobile phone. So you know the commodity price, you know. So the digital revolution will be part of it. And somebody have added the youth revolution. They say that if Africa use those 4 revolutions and put it as guidance in implementing the development agenda, I think we will be achieving Agenda 2063. We might not be there to watch it, but our children and my grandchildren will see Agenda 2063 be really effective and in supporting the life of the ordinary people, but bringing the development of Africa.
As we conclude this interview, Dear Excellency, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I really think that we are doing well, but it's not enough. We need to mobilize more resources, human resources, but also financial resources. You know, this is always the last thing that we are talking about. Africa is rich. We are rich of our population. In 10 years to come, Africa will have the larger population in the world. We have the sun, we have our soil, our land, we have the water, we have minerals, we have oil, we have gas. You name them, we have them. Our problem is how we are going to use all these resources for the benefit of Africans. Africa is rising, but the African people are not rising. So we need to make sure that we are all rising. But if we mobilize our resources together and we work together in harmony and we silence the gun, Africa will rise and the people of Africa will rise. So that's what I see Africa moving. But we will get there because our young people will not the young people will not leave us with an agenda that is half accomplished.
Excellency, thank you for accepting to grant this interview to the Directorate of Information and Communication of the African Union.
Thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm so glad and happy that we can exchange and you are bringing it to the public and seeing women sitting at this position. And that's why I like now the African Union, because the emergence of women and men, hand in hand, because we cannot have a world without women, but we don't want a world without men. But we see competent women that are doing what you're doing. We want to congratulate you as well. I think this is the first time in the history of the AU that we are having this kind of dialogue, which will go to the public.
This is very encouraging, Excellency. Dear listeners, we have come to the end of this very interesting interview with Her Excellency, Mrs. Bineta Diop, Special Envoy of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission on Women, Peace and Security. Thank you for listening. We will be bringing you more information about the African Union in our next edition of Know Your African Union. And until then, goodbye.